Chapter 40. Valancy paused a moment on the porch of the brick house in Elm Street. She felt that she ought to knock like a stranger. Her rosebush, she idly noticed, was loaded with buds. The rubber plant stood beside the prim door. A momentary horror overcame her, a horror of the existence to which she was returning. Then she opened the door and walked in. Degree, I wonder if the prodigal son ever felt really at home again, plus or minus, she thought. Mrs. Frederick and Cousin Stickles were in the sitting room. Uncle Benjamin was there, too. They looked blankly at Valancy, realizing at once that something was wrong. This was not the saucy, impudent thing who had laughed at them in this very room last summer. This was a gray-faced woman with the eyes of a creature who had been stricken by a mortal blow. Valancy looked indifferently around the room. She had changed so much, and it had changed so little. The same pictures hung on the walls. The little orphan who knelt at her never-finished prayer by the bed, whereon reposed the black kitten that never grew up into a cat. The gray degree steel engraving plus or minus of Cotter bras, where the British regiment forever stood at bay. The crayon enlargement of the boyish father she had never known. There they all hung in the same places. The green cascade of Degree Wandering Jew plus or minus still tumbled out of the old granite saucepan on the window stand. The same elaborate, never-used pitcher stood at the same angle on the sideboard shelf. The blue and gilt vases that had been among her mother's wedding presents still primly adorned the mantelpiece, flanking the china clock of Barost and besprayed ware that never went. The chairs in exactly the same places. Her mother and Cousin Stickles, likewise unchanged, regarding her with stony unwelcome. Valancy had to speak first. Degree IV come home, mother, plus or minus, she said tiredly. Degree so I see. Plus or minus. Mrs. Frederick's voice was very icy. She had resigned herself to Valancy's desertion. She had almost succeeded in forgetting there was a Valancy. She had rearranged and organized her systematic life without any reference to an ungrateful, rebellious child. She had taken her place again in a society which ignored the fact that she had ever had a daughter and pitted her, if it pitted her at all, only in discreet whispers and asides. The plain truth was that, by this time, Mrs. Frederick did not want Valancy to come back, did not want ever to see or hear of her again. And now, of course, Valancy was here, with tragedy and disgrace and scandal trailing after her visibly. Degree so I see, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick. Degree may I ask why, plus or minus? Degree because I am not going to die, plus or minus, said Valancy huskily. Degree God bless my soul, plus or minus, said Uncle Benjamin. Degree who said you were going to die, plus or minus? Degree I suppose, plus or minus, said Cousin Stickles shrewishly. Cousin Stickles did not want Valancy back either. Degree, I suppose you've found out he has another wife, as we've been sure all along. Plus or minus? Degree no. I only wish he had, plus or minus, said Valancy. She was not suffering particularly, but she was very tired. If only the explanations were all over and she were upstairs in her old, ugly room alone. Just alone. The rattle of the beads on her mother's sleeves, as they swung on the arms of the reed chair, almost drove her crazy. Nothing else was worrying her, but all at once it seemed that she simply could not endure that thin, insistent rattle. Degree my home, as I told you, is always open to you, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick stonily. Degree, but I can never forgive you. Plus or minus? Valancy gave a mirthless laugh. Degree, I care very little for that if I could only forgive myself, plus or minus, she said. Degree come, plus or minus, said Uncle Benjamin testily. But rather enjoying himself. He felt he had Valency under his thumb again. Degree we've had enough of mystery. What has happened? Why have you left that fellow? No doubt. There's reason enough, but what particular reason is it, plus or minus? Valency began to speak mechanically. She told her tale bluntly, and barely. Degree a year ago Dr. Trent told me I had angina pectoris and could not live long. I wanted to have some life before I died. That's why I went away. Why I married Barney. And now I've found it is all a mistake. There is nothing wrong with my heart. I've got to live and Barney only married me out of pity. So I have to leave him free. Plus or minus. Degree God bless me, plus or minus, said Uncle Benjamin. Cousin Stickles began to cry. Degree Valency, if you'd only had confidence in your own mother, plus or minus. Degree yes, I know, plus or minus, said Valency impatiently. Degree what's the use of going into that now? I can undo this year. God knows I wish I could. Ive tricked Barney into marrying me, and he's really Bernard Redfern. Dr. Redfern's son, of Montreal. And his father wants him to go back to him. Plus or minus. Uncle Benjamin made a queer sound. Cousin Stickles took her black-bordered handkerchief away from her eyes and stared at Valency. A queer gleam suddenly shot into Mrs. Frederick's stone-grey orbs. Degree Dr. Redfern, not the purple pill man, plus or minus, she said. Valency nodded. Degree he's John Foster, too, the writer of those nature books. Plus or minus. Degree but plus or minus. Mrs. Frederick was visibly agitated, though not over the thought that she was the mother-in-law of John Foster. Degree _Dr. Redfern is a millionaire plus or minus. Uncle Benjamin shut his mouth with a snap. Degree 10 times over, plus or minus, he said. Valency nodded. Degree yes. Barney left home years ago, because of some trouble, some disappointment. Now he will likely go back. So you see, I had to come home. He doesn't love me. I can't hold him to a bond he was tricked into. Plus or minus. Uncle Benjamin looked incredibly sly. Degree did he say so? Does he want to get rid of you, plus or minus? Degree no. I haven't seen him since I found out. But I tell you, he only married me out of pity, because I asked him to, because he thought it would only be for a little while. Plus or minus. Mrs. Frederick and Cousin Stickles both tried to speak, but Uncle Benjamin waved a hand at them and frowned portentously. Degree, let me handle this, plus or minus. Wave and frown seemed to say to Valency. Degree, well, dear, we'll talk it all over later. You see, we don't quite understand everything yet. As Cousin Stickles says, you should have confided in us before. Later on, I dare say we can find a way out of this. Plus or minus. Degree, you think Barney can easily get a divorce, don't you? Plus or minus, said Valency eagerly. Uncle Benjamin silenced with another wave the exclamation of horror he knew was trembling on Mrs. Frederick's lips. Degree, trust to me, Valency. Everything will arrange itself. Tell me this. Dossie. Have you been happy up back? Was Senior Emma Redfern good to you, plus or minus? Degree, I have been very happy, and Barney was very good to me, plus or minus, said Valency. As if reciting a lesson. She remembered when she studied grammar at school she had disliked the past and perfect tenses. They had always seemed so pathetic. Degree, I have been plus or minus, it was all over and done with. Degree then dawn, worry, little girl. Plus or minus how amazingly paternal Uncle Benjamin was. Degree your family will stand behind you. We'll see what can be done. Plus or minus. Degree thank you, plus or minus said Valancy dully. Really, it was quite decent of Uncle Benjamin. Degree can I go and lie down a little while? I am tired. Plus or minus. Degree of course you retired. Plus or minus Uncle Benjamin patted her hand gently, very gently. Degree all worn out and nervous. Go and lie down, by all means. You'll see things in quite a different light after you've had a good sleep. Plus or minus. He held the door open. As she went through he whispered, Degree what is the best way to keep a man's love, plus or minus? Valancy smiled wanly. But she had come back to the old life, the old shackles. Degree what, plus or minus she asked as meekly as of yore. Degree not to return it, plus or minus said Uncle Benjamin with a chuckle. He shut the door and rubbed his hands. Nodded and smiled mysteriously round the room. Degree poor little Doss, plus or minus he said pathetically. Degree, do you really suppose that Snaith can actually be Dr. Redfern's son, plus or minus? Gasped Mrs. Frederick. Degree I see no reason for doubting it. She says Dr. Redfern has been there. Why, the man is rich as wedding cake. Amelia, I've always believed there was more in Doss than most people thought. You kept her down too much, repressed her. She never had a chance to show what was in her. And now she's landed a millionaire for a husband. Plus or minus. Degree but plus or minus hesitated Mrs. Frederick. Degree they told terrible tales about him. Plus or minus. Degree all gossip and invention, all gossip and invention. It's always been a mystery to me why people should be so ready to invent and circulate slanders about other people they know absolutely nothing about. I can't understand why you paid so much attention to gossip and surmise. Just because he didn't choose to mix up with everybody, people resented it. I was surprised to find what a decent fellow he seemed to be that time. He came into my store with Valancy. I discounted all the yarns then, and there. Plus or minus. Degree but he was seen dead drunk in Port Lawrence once, plus or minus said Cousin Stickles. Doubtfully, yet as one very willing to be convinced to the contrary. Degree who saw him, plus or minus, demanded Uncle Benjamin truculently. Degree who saw him? Old Jemmy String said he saw him. I wouldn't take old Jemmy String's word. On oath. He's too drunk himself half the time to see straight. He said. He saw him lying drunk on a bench in the park. Shaw. Redfern's been asleep there. Don worry over that plus or minus. Degree but his clothes and that awful old car plus or minus said Mrs. Frederick. Uncertainly. Degree eccentricities of genius plus or minus declared Uncle Benjamin. Degree you heard Doss say he was John Foster. I am not up in literature myself, but I heard a lecturer from Toronto say that John Foster's books had put Canada on the literary map of the world. Plus or minus. Degree, I suppose we must forgive her, plus or minus yielded Mrs. Frederick. Degree forgive her, plus or minus Uncle Benjamin snorted. Really, Amelia was an incredibly stupid woman. No wonder poor Doss had gone sick and tired of living with her. Degree well, yes, I think you'd better forgive her. The question is will Snaith forgive us plus or minus. Degree what if she persists in leaving him? You've no idea how stubborn she can be, plus or minus said Mrs. Frederick. Degree leave it all to me, Amelia. Leave it all to me. You women have muddled it enough. This whole affair has been bungled from start to finish. If you had put yourself to a little trouble years ago, Amelia, she would not have bolted over the traces as she did. Just let her alone, don't worry her with advice or questions till she's ready to talk. She's evidently run away in a panic because she's afraid he'd be angry with her for fooling him. Most extraordinary thing of Trent to tell her such a yarn. That's what comes of going to strange doctors. Well, we mustn't blame her too harshly, poor child. Redfern will come after her. If he doesn't, I'll hunt him up and talk to him as man to man. He may be a millionaire, but Valancy is a sterling. He can't repudiate her just because she was mistaken about her heart disease. Not likely he'll want to. Doss is a little overstrung. Bless me, I must get in the habit of calling her Valancy. She isn't a baby any longer. Now, remember. Amelia. Be very kind and sympathetic. Plus or minus. It was something of a large order to expect Mrs. Frederick to be kind and sympathetic. But she did her best. When supper was ready she went up and asked Valancy if she would like a cup of tea. Valancy, lying on her bed, declined. She just wanted to be left alone for a while. Mrs. Frederick left her alone. She did not even remind Valancy that her plight was the outcome of her own lack of daughterly respect and obedience. One could not exactly say things like that to the daughter-in-law of a millionaire.